Between 1990 and 1991, a serial killer wreaked havoc in Texas with a highly distinctive method of murder, so unique that no other killer could replicate it. He had an obsessive fascination with human eyes, especially those that were beautiful and attractive. This morphed into a pathological hobby. He would seek out sex workers with beautiful eyes, shoot them, and then remove their eyes. His anatomical skills were exceptionally advanced, surpassing even those of some doctors. Not all doctors are trained to remove the drooping optic nerve and all six major muscles connecting the eye to the eye socket without damaging the eyelid. As a result, he was dubbed the Eye Killer. His name was Charles Albright, a serial killer from Dallas, Texas. On December 18, 1991, a jury deliberated and found Charles Albright guilty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murders of Shirley Williams, Mary Lou Pratt, and Susan Peterson. Until his death in 2020, everything about Charles Albright remained shrouded in mystery. But what exactly happened in 1990? What was his background? How did he acquire such advanced skills? And why was he so obsessed with beautiful eyes? In most cases, serial killers are brutal and poorly educated individuals driven by their own twisted motives. However, Charles was described by community neighbors and friends as charming and polite. One of Charles's friends said, "Believe me, if he were really a psychopathic killer, he wouldn't be able to keep it a secret, right?" Charles Frederick Albright was born on August 10, 1933, in Amarillo, Texas. His biological mother, an outstanding law student, was only 16 years old when she secretly married another student and became pregnant. When the girl's father discovered this, he demanded that she annul the marriage and put the baby up for adoption, or he would throw her out of the house. Consequently, shortly after Charles's birth, his biological mother sent him to an orphanage. At 3 weeks old, Charles was adopted by a young, dark-haired woman named Della Albright and her husband Fred, a grocer from Dallas. They lived in Oak Cliff, a predominantly white middle-class neighborhood on the other side of the river from downtown. At the time, it was a beautiful residential area. Della was very fond of Charles, raising goats in the backyard so he could drink goat's milk, which she believed was better for him than cow's milk. However, she could also be a strict and suffocating mother. When Charles was under a year old, she would lock him in a dark room as punishment for chewing on her tape measure. If he refused to take naps, she would bind him to his bed, and if he refused to drink milk, she would hit him. In fact, people in the community often talked about Della's strange and gloomy personality. Although she and Fred were not poor, she was notoriously frugal at mealtimes, even picking up old bones discarded by the local butcher to make soup. Despite her peculiar methods of punishment, her friends claimed it was simply because she had never raised a child before. Charles himself recognized how eager she was for him to succeed. Every morning, before the school bus arrived, Della would make him practice the piano for at least 30 minutes. She taught him so much reading, writing, and arithmetic that he skipped 2 grades in elementary school. Charles was a talented boy, capable of almost anything, from playing the piano to naming all the constellations. He even performed tap dance at the famous Texas Theater. When Charles was 11, Della introduced him to taxidermy, bought him a gun, and helped him kill small animals. She even demonstrated how to use various tools: a knife for cutting skulls, a small spoon for scooping out brains, an anatomical knife for removing eyes from their sockets, and tweezers for extracting eyes. She even skinned his first bird and taught him not to cut too deeply. Charles, fascinated by taxidermy, took a course on it, practicing the art of dissection and skinning. An essential part of taxidermy is removing an animal's eyes and replacing them with glass eyes to ensure the specimen's long-term preservation. On one occasion, Charles spent hours perfecting his taxidermy work to make it look as realistic as possible. During the final touch-up phase, he would visit a local taxidermy shop to select a pair of perfect eyes. He loved gazing at the boxes filled with ornate fake eyes: owl eyes, eagle eyes, deer eyes. He admired their rainbow-like sheen and wished he could collect them like other boys collected marbles. However, Della wouldn't let him do this because the eyes were too expensive. Instead, she would open her sewing kit, find a few buttons, and begin working. Then she and her son would place the birds in the oak cabinet in front of the house. These birds had no eyes. Instead, two dark buttons were sewn where their delicate feathered faces met, each appearing dull under the living room light. This childhood deprivation led Charles to develop an unusual obsession with eyes. Subsequent psychologists theorize that this intense desire for eyes drove Charles down a criminal path. Despite Charles's good performance in school, he began delving into crime in his teens. At just 13, he had already been charged with theft and serious assault, marking the beginning of his criminal career. By the age of 17, he was caught as part of a student theft gang that broke into 3 stores and stole hundreds of dollars worth of goods. His adoptive mother, Dele, went to the store owners to try to compensate for the stolen items and attempted to persuade the judge to let her represent Charles as his lawyer. She even offered to serve his sentence in his place. Nevertheless, the boy was sentenced to a year in prison, spending his 18th birthday behind bars. Meanwhile, Dele worked hard to keep this matter hidden, so much so that no one in her community knew that Charles had become a convicted felon. After his release, Charles attended Arkansas State Teachers College in Conway, Arkansas, majoring in pre-med with the intention of becoming a surgeon. During his time at college, he quickly became one of the most popular students. He was very well-rounded, serving as the president of the French club, the business manager for the yearbook, a member of the school choir, and a halfback on the football team. However, Charles was not just seen as a good student. On one occasion, he broke into a physics professor's office during the day, pried open the lock on his cabinet, stole the physics exam papers, and then ran downtown to make a copy. He returned the papers to the cabinet within an hour, while the professor, teaching in a nearby classroom, remained completely unaware. Charles's love for mischief damaged his reputation. He received poor behavior grades for shooting rubber bands around school and climbing out of the study hall. He would even set fire to his chemistry teacher's skirt out of boredom. He then began dating a charming young English major, Betty Hurst, and planned to marry her. He excelled in science. Despite barely studying, he earned an A in human anatomy. People at the school said Charles had a promising future. He even talked about attending medical school to become a surgeon. However, Charles did not abandon his adolescent penchant for theft. During his first year at college, he broke into a girl's dormitory and took some nude photos. He even cut out a friend's ex-girlfriend's pictures and pasted them onto another girl's photos and his own wall. He then manipulated a girl into giving him the keys to the entire campus. After he was caught with stolen items, he was expelled from the college. Charles believed that despite his expulsion, he should still earn a degree. Therefore, he forged a degree using stolen documents and fake signatures to create fictitious bachelor's and master's degrees. Charles also married his college girlfriend and had a daughter. Betty Hurst worked as a teacher. In 1961, Charles was arrested for receiving and concealing stolen property, though no charges were filed. In 1968, he forged certificates of excellence from Arkansas State Teachers College and used them to apply for a high school teaching position. Charles's students found him charming. During field trips, he could fluently recite the scientific names of every plant he encountered in Latin and discuss every insect he found in a rotting log. His teaching career continued until the principal discovered that Charles's degrees and teaching credentials were fake. Consequently, Charles was sentenced to a year of probation for falsifying official records. In 1974, Charles divorced his wife. In 1981, following the death of Charles's mother, he sexually harassed the daughter of a neighbor. He pleaded guilty and received probation for the offense, but later Charles claimed he was innocent and only pleaded guilty to avoid trouble. In 1985, Charles fell in love with a woman named Dixie Austin, a beautiful and shy widow he met during a trip to Arkansas. This was one of the most romantic periods of his life. He arranged elegant dinner dates for her and captivated her with stories about art and nature. After confirming their relationship, Charles soon moved in with Dixie. Dixie was wealthy and financially supported Charles, paying all his bills. On the morning of December 13, 1990, the body of a woman was discovered in a remote, nearly forgotten, low-income area in South Dallas. The woman, weighing 156 pounds, was found naked except for a t-shirt and a bra pushed up over her breasts. Her eyes were closed, and her face and chest bore severe bruises. A police officer at the scene immediately recognized the woman as 33-year-old Mary Pratt, a seasoned sex worker who worked at the Star Motel in Oak Cliff. It was unusual for a sex worker to be murdered, especially someone as well known as Mary Pratt. Mary was not the type of sex worker who openly solicited on the streets. She rarely had extra money, and what she did have was usually spent on drugs. She never bought sexy clothes. This murder was a body dump case, one of the most difficult types of murder to solve. The victim was killed in one location and dumped in another. There were no witnesses, no murder weapon, almost no forensic evidence, no fingerprints, and no obvious motive. The Dallas County Medical Examiner's report indicated that Mary had been shot in the back of the head with a .44 caliber bullet, which was the cause of death. Her eyes were also missing, as if a surgeon had precisely removed them with a scalpel. In the wake of such a shocking incident, the Dallas County Police urgently contacted the FBI. The agency maintains a database of the most heinous murders across the country. However, an FBI agent reported that there were no records of such a brutal murder in the database. The Dallas County Police subsequently launched an investigation, but it yielded no breakthroughs. Due to the lack of leads, the case was temporarily shelved. 2 months later, on the morning of February 10, 1991, the body of 27-year-old sex worker Susan Beth Peterson was discovered near the location where Mary had died. Like Mary, Susan's body was found almost completely naked. The autopsy revealed she had been shot 3 times. One bullet had entered her heart, another had struck the back of her head, and a third had penetrated the top of her skull. Her eyes had also been surgically removed. Dallas County Police realized that Mary and Susan had both been killed by the same perpetrator, but they could not find any key evidence to identify the killer. On March 19, 1991, the body of another sex worker, Shirley Williams, was found at the Avalon Motel, several miles from the Star Motel. Her body was discovered at 6:20 a.m., just half a block from an elementary school in Oak Cliff. Young students walking to school could clearly see the naked body lying by the roadside. The autopsy report showed that Shirley had a broken nose, facial bruising, and a gunshot wound to the back of her head. Her eyes were missing, and an X-Acto blade's broken tip was found embedded in her right eye socket. The series of 3 brazen murders within 4 months caused a stir in the local community. Since the killer had left no fingerprints at any of the crime scenes, the police faced significant challenges. They decided to focus their investigation on sex workers and their clients. Soon, a startling discovery was made. A friend of Mary mentioned that Mary had served a man named Charles, who had a particular obsession with eyes. On March 22, 1991, at 2:30 a.m., a tactical team of police officers stormed into Charles's home. As Charles was handcuffed and taken away, he remained silent. Dixie, clad in pajamas, stumbled out of bed, incredulously looking at Charles and then at the police. Realizing that the man she loved might have done something terrible, she began to scream. Investigators discovered a Smith & Wesson .44 Magnum revolver, several X-Acto knives, and a red-stained condom at Charles's residence. They also found Nazi literature, books about serial killers, and several dolls missing their eyes. Unfortunately, the gun found at Charles's home did not match the weapon used by the Eyes killer in the murders of Mary and Susan. Investigators also did not find any blood-stained clothing, although they did discover socks and underwear soaked in bleach. Additionally, Charles's wife provided garage receipts proving that their car was unavailable during the times of the first 2 murders. However, investigators found hair and fibers on Charles's blanket and vacuum cleaner that might connect him to the murders. The vacuum cleaner contained hair consistent with Shirley Williams, although there was insufficient hair for DNA analysis with the technology of the time. Based on this evidence, Charles Albright was arrested and charged with the murders of the Eyes killer and Rhonda Bowie, a sex worker murdered in 1988, whose eyes were not removed like the other victims. On December 2, 1991, the trial began. However, the prosecution's case began to unravel. The yellow raincoat Shirley Williams was wearing when she was killed was discarded from evidence, despite having been shown to the jury. A sex worker who had previously claimed Charles assaulted her recanted, stating she had been coerced by the police. Charles's neighbors also supported his claim that the car was unavailable. Due to a lack of evidence, the prosecution heavily relied on hair evidence linking Charles to the three murders. Although DNA evidence also connected him to Rhonda Bowie's murder, the charge was dropped due to his alibi. Ultimately, Charles was convicted of killing Shirley Williams and sentenced to life in prison. His defense's appeal, citing a lack of evidence, was denied. Charles was held at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice in Amarillo. According to official sources, he remained fascinated by human eyes and was very interested in news reports about eyes being removed or gouged. The 6 missing eyes have never been found, with some speculating that Charles might have eaten them. Charles passed away in 2020 at the age of 87. In modern forensic science, an important theoretical basis is the Locard's exchange principle, which suggests that when a crime occurs, there will be some material exchange between the suspect, victim, and surrounding environment. This can be active, such as stealing a victim's wallet, or passive, such as inadvertently leaving footprints. The police's task is to find evidence of these material exchanges to apprehend and charge the suspect. This series of murders closely aligns with the Locard's exchange principle.